So today I would like to talk about addictive personality disorder and spiritual possession. A lot of people are interested in spirituality nowadays. They're interested in, acquiring certain type of spiritual knowledge, or they consider it spiritual. But the thing is that most of us don't understand that spirituality is not separate from us. And in order to really naturally evolve spiritually, we are to understand what is our spiritual essence or spiritual substance. And so today I would like to talk about a very essential topic, which is addictive personality disorder. And I'm not going to talk about it from a psychology or psychiatry point of view. I'm going to give a spiritual perspective on what that actually is. And from a spiritual perspective, all the disorders are seen as one and the same thing, or the root of all the disorders is seen as one and the same thing. It's internal incompleteness. How do we lose this completeness? Why do we get possessed? And possession doesn't only mean the acute spiritual possession by certain entities, but it's an overall understanding of energetic wholesomeness. What are we? When we are wholesome spiritually, we cannot get possessed, we cannot get addicted to anything. We can enjoy life, we can enjoy the projected reality as long as we're in the body, but we cannot simply get addicted. So how does the addiction originate? How does the possession originate? This is a very, very important question, and it becomes a stumbling block for the majority of people aspiring at spiritual evolution, at self-healing and self-improvement. All of these things, all these notions of self-improvement and all are impossible without this realization of how we come to the point of spiritual trauma or being incomplete. So when we are children, or in whichever life, in whichever incarnation, when we are born in this world, we may have unfortunate interactions with the projected reality, and this projected reality includes our parents or whatever we experience in our first 7 years of life. So during this time, our personality undergoes a process of development and interaction with the external reality. And when we experience trauma, trauma means that wholesome being, that energetic, intact, wholesome being interacts in such a way with the projected reality that a piece of self is left in that projected reality. And that piece is usually, it's not usually, it's an energetic piece of self. And you may say it's a mental, emotional, or whatever, however you want to describe it, but it's a piece of one's conscious being, if you may call it that way. And so with time, the more pieces we leave in the projected reality, the more or the less wholesome we perceive ourselves. And so we see that we start having that internal impulse to get that fulfillment, to fill in these holes within our energetic self through the projected reality. And that's how we get into the cycle of energetic, spiritual, emotional, mental codependency on the projected reality. So, and it seems like we just get with time into this cycle which is impossible to break. We get more and more dependent on the projected reality, looking for more and more fulfillment, because our consciousness projects itself more and more outwards and becomes more and more codependent on that, on the projected reality. And so the energetic holes expand or grow. And so we lose our vitality, we lose our conscious energy more and more by interacting with the projected reality and by trying to find this fulfillment through the projected reality, and yet getting into this cycle of codependency. Now, when we speak about the spiritual possession, it's the same thing, but it happens a little bit on a different level. The spiritual possession happens, it's actually a little bit different from the addictive personality disorder, although they may coexist together. So when people leave a sense of self in a projected reality, they look for something else to fulfill themselves. So they find so-called aspects of this projected reality to which they get addicted. And why they get addicted to them? Because they find, or they create a new sense of self through that projected reality, and so they become codependent. When there is a big trauma or a serious trauma like sexual abuse or anything like it, or emotional neglect, or emotional abuse, mental abuse, so our energetic self becomes more porous, you may say, or we have holes within ourselves because we left a part of self with that traumatic experience, objects and people. And so the more we are traumatized, the more we are prone to develop the addictive personality disorder, or the more we are prone to get possessed. And the possession does not necessarily happen through drugs or alcohol abuse or smoking itself, but it's the way we create a connection between the experiences that are created through this abuse and ourselves. So we have an opening to the subtle reality with which we start copulating, through which we get connection with subtle experiences like dream world, and where we get some sort of a sense of self, where we feel like this reality, this subtle reality, this dream world will create a meaning in us. And so we create this codependency on experiencing trips, experiencing something new, stimulating our nervous system, exciting our nervous system, because we do not feel the excitement of being complete. So we need to get this excitement from the outside reality, and that's how we get into the cycle of codependency on this projected reality. Now, the spiritual possession happens because we, through traumatic experience, we create shadows of the self, you may say. We deny the experience, and yet the experience happened. The energetic substance of our self is left with the experience, and that becomes our shadow. And that becomes the shadow that may eventually possess us. And the way we come to the point of possession may be through drugs, alcohol, through emotional dramas in our lives, through relationships, and so on and so forth. So drugs and alcohol just stimulate our nervous system and get us into this cycle of codependency that may eventually lead to a psychotic episode, or in other words, to a spiritual possession by our shadows, or a contact with with the energetic field of the subtle reality through which we're trying to find a sense of self or regain a sense of I am something, I'm special. And so at the root of spiritual possession lies trauma, or in other words, unfulfilled self, unwholesome self, that the first expression of which is unhealthy self-centeredness and narcissism. But narcissism is not really that wholesome self-centeredness. It's more of a focus on self through the projected reality, where the projected reality becomes a means to fulfill one's unwholesome self, or fulfill those holes in oneself, to find a new sense of self. And so narcissism is actually not a focus on oneself. It's more of a perception of self as I am nothing. I'm like a black hole that pulls everything from the projected reality into oneself. That's how we create the disorder, because the disorder is happening through this desire to fulfill oneself through the projected reality. And so there's a very, very strong codependency on the projected reality, where one does not feel content within oneself, and so one needs to constantly be connected with the projected reality in order to feel that one is something. And so one constantly looks for approval from the projected reality, for the approval for some kind of a sense of self in the projected reality. That's why one is codependent and addicted to the projected reality. So narcissism can be also called an addiction to the projected reality, where one needs or feels compelled to manipulate that projected reality in order to get fulfilled. So, and then the more this unfulfillment grows, the more one feels dependent on the projected reality, and the more the internal feeling of discontent grows, and so one loses oneself to the projected reality. And if one gets into the cycle of unhealthy lifestyle and codependency on drugs and alcohol or something else, the more one loses oneself to these addictions, and the more one feels unfulfilled. And so there is more potential to get actually possessed by that which one is incapable of facing. Because in order to focus within, and this is the only way to heal oneself, is to focus within. And focusing within doesn't mean to create a strange sense of self. I'm very special, I'm this, I'm that. But to focus within means to cultivate one's own natural being and contentment within. It means being completely focused on within one's own being, within one's mind, within one's body, without constantly trying to create links with the projected reality. Because as long as we are within our body, as long as we have healthy perception of self, we don't need the projected reality to describe us, to fulfill us, or to create a sense of self. We can enjoy the projected reality without any particular need to create a feeling of self-fulfillment, because we are already fulfilled, and this is different. So in order to understand what spiritual healing means, what evolution means, we have to regain, first of all, this sense of content self, where we can say that I am fulfilled, I'm wholesome within myself, with or without that projected reality. So I can enjoy the projected reality, the world, in a wholesome, content way, where there is no risk for me to be codependent or attached to this world, but yet I'm still nourishing and living in balance, enjoying the projected reality. So this is the point, and this is a big difference by enjoying the world and being dependent on it, or enjoying the world through the sense of wholesome